Good morning, grade 12 history learners and virtual school viewers. I'm V Mgwali. Today I will just continue and do topic 5. In your question paper is also question 5 in paper 2. Remember, on the 15th, it was Miss who was doing question 4. Miss Moyake was doing question 4 with you, the international response to apartheid. Still remember talking about the disinvestment, the EDAF, as well as the role of frontline state. So that is the first essay in paper 2. If you still remember, on the 15th, I came and then we were doing question 6, which is the fall of communism. If you still remember, we made mention of the impact of Mikhail Gorbachev, where we mentioned his policies, the glasnost as well as the perestroika, the impact of the Battle of Pretoria, and then we said all those events, they made it possible for the two enemies, the National Party and the ANC, to negotiate. And then we also made mention of the fact that both the National Party and the ANC, they were forced by the Western powers to negotiate. And then we said de Klerk was on the way to reforms. And then in 1990, he released Nelson Mandela. That's where we ended last time. Today we'll continue and do our topic 5, which is also question 5 in paper 2. That is the road to democracy. This question, it is very, very tricky. I understand why most learners, they stay away from this topic. It is the only topic which is like a step ladder. If you know a step ladder, there's one step leading to another. In other words, you cannot start with step number 10 and come to step number 1. You must start with step number 1 and ultimately reach step number 10. That's why it is very, very tricky. Now, we will start with CODESA Minute. In the CODESA Minute, it was on 14 May 1990. There were 6 members of the ANC, and then they met their counterparts, 6 members of the National Party, in CODESA in Cape Town. Those negotiations were known as the CODESA Minutes. What is important is that what was agreed upon in these minutes. In the CODESA Minutes, both the ANC as well as the National Party, they agreed to open lines of communication. The National Party, it will release the political prisoners, as well as it will end repressive laws. The National Party ended the Separatist Amenities Act, and then I've already said earlier on, these negotiations, they were known as the CODESA Minutes. Now, after the CODESA Minute, there comes the second round of negotiations, which is known as the Pretoria Minute. It is the same contingent. In other words, it's still the 6 ANC members led by Nelson Mandela and the 6 National Party members led by M.W. de Klerk. They met in Pretoria on the 6th of August 1990. In this meeting, the ANC agreed to suspend the armed struggle. On its side, the National Party agreed to release all political prisoners and also ended the state of emergency in Natal. You must note well that both in the CODESA Minute and the CODESA, in the CODESA Minute as well as the Pretoria Minute, is only the 2 political parties that are negotiating. That is the National Party and the ANC only. Let's look at step number 3, which is called CODESA I. Here now, you must note well that it is not only 2 political parties. Political parties now are many. It was on the 20th December 1991. It's the ANC, the National Party, and other 17 political organizations. They met in Kempton Park in what is known as the World Trade Center. So these negotiations were known as the Convention for a Democratic South Africa I. That is CODESA I. What was agreed upon by these political parties? The political parties agreed that to the ANC and the National Party proposal of the Declaration of Intent. So, in other words, they signed the Declaration of Intent that we all agree that the negotiations, they must continue. South Africa, it must be undivided. There must be a multi-party democracy. There must be an in-depth judiciary, as well as there must be a new constitution. However, there are other political parties which did not join CODESA I. For example, the PAC, as well as the Inkatha Freedom Party and the Conservative Party, they withdrew from CODESA I for their various reasons. For example, the PAC felt that the negotiations, they must happen outside the borders of South Africa under the members of the United Nations. So they felt that no, we are not going to participate in negotiations if negotiations are held here in South Africa, and in this negotiation there are no United Nations that are chairing these negotiations. So that's why the PAC did not participate. The IFP, that is Inkatha Freedom Party of Gatsha, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, they said we are not participating in these negotiations because we wanted the kingdom of Zululand to be represented. If there is no representative of our chief, then we as the Inkatha Freedom Party, we are not participating in these negotiations. And then all the homeland leaders, they met together and they formed a group which was called COSAC. They also did not participate in the CODESA I meeting. Now, can you say that CODESA I was a success or a failure? You find that we all agree that CODESA I was a success because there's a lot that these 19 political parties agreed on. Furthermore, we will look at the wise-only referendum. In the period between CODESA I and CODESA II, in 1992, the National Party, it lost 3 by-elections to the Conservative Party of Dr. Steiner. De Klerk announced a wise-only referendum to test the wide opinion on reforms and negotiations. So in other words, he wanted the wise to vote whether they agree to declare to continue with the negotiations or he must pull out. What was the outcome of the wise-only referendum? The outcome, it was a landslide victory for de Klerk. In other words, 60% of the wise that voted, they agreed that de Klerk must continue with the negotiations. So now de Klerk could no longer use the excuse of white conservative opinion to procrastinate in moving towards a non-racial election. In other words, since the majority of the whites, they agreed that de Klerk must continue with the negotiations. So he is no way that because there's 40% that voted against the referendum, so he could pull off. So he was forced to continue with the negotiations. Now let us look on CODESA II. On May 1992, political parties met again. They agreed that SABC must present a neutral view of the negotiations. However, the political parties, they failed to agree on a number of issues. They failed to reach an agreement on the constitution as well as the interim government. Now, since they failed to agree, ANC withdrew from the negotiations and Nelson Mandela threatened to roll out a mass action to make South Africa an ungovernable. So in other words, the ANC will lead a series of strikes in making the country ungovernable. Can we say that CODESA II was a success or a failure? We all agree that CODESA II, it was a failure because political parties, they did not agree on the interim government, as well they did not agree on the constitution. Furthermore, there was an ongoing violence. Violence was throughout during the negotiations. There are many types of violence that occurred. So we cannot discuss all of them, but we just cite some examples. For example, there was violence in Groote, where Inkatha supporters, they were killing ANC supporters in trains. On the 17th of June 1992, that's what happened, which is known as Baibotong Massacre. Members of Inkatha Freedom Party hostel dwellers, they attacked the residents of Baibotong in Vereeniging. So in other words, they may think that they are from the township. They were perceived to be ANC members. After this incident, Nelson Mandela pressurized de Klerk to establish a commission of inquiry. That commission of inquiry, it was established and then it was led by a retired judge, Gladstone. The finding of Gladstone Commission states that there's an evidence where South African defense vehicles transported Inkatha Freedom Party members from the hostel. They gave them weapons to kill residents of Baibotong. So in other words, there was an evidence whereby de Klerk was implicated on what was known as black-on-black violence. Very same 1992, on the 7th of September, in the Eastern Cape, unarmed ANC supporters, they were killed by the Ciskei military ruler by the name of Brigadier Oba Joshua. So it means that now the country was plunged in ongoing violence, left, right, and center. Now Mandela and de Klerk, they decided to meet when they felt that, no, the country is engulfed in violence. Then let's continue with the negotiations. Now, these negotiations were known as the Record of Understanding. You must note well that the Record of Understanding, it was a secret meeting between the African National Congress and the National Party. The African National Congress was represented by Cyril Ramaphosa, and the National Party was represented by Ruth Meyer. What did they agree upon on the Record of Understanding? The government agreed to release more political prisoners. It should erect fences around migrant workers' hostel. Also, the government banned the carrying of traditional weapons. So, all those were the agreements between Ruth Meyer, representing the National Party, and Ramaphosa, representing the ANC. In other words, both political parties, they agree that in order for us to stop this ongoing violence, the negotiations, they should carry on. Furthermore, all political parties, they met again in World Trade Center. And that meeting now, it was called the Multiparty Negotiation Forum. Why these negotiations were happening in 1993? In April, Chris Hani, the Chief of Staff of the South African Communist Party, was murdered by Clive W. Lewis and Maurice Lewis. Clive W. Lewis and Yalus Walus, they murdered Chris Hani in April 1993. This is a very significant incident because it nearly brought the country to a civil war. It is for the first time that de Klerk felt that he is losing power. He approached Nelson Mandela and asked him to appear in the national television and asked the country to calm down so that the negotiations should continue. Nelson Mandela calmed down the nation, and then they explained that the perpetrators, they wanted to delay negotiations by killing Chris Hani. So violence must stop so that we must proceed to a new democracy. In the multi-party negotiation forum, a lot was agreed. A date was set for the election that it must be the 27th of April 1994. The IEC was agreed it must be established to administer the smooth running of the elections, as well as international observers will be informed to come and observe during the elections. However, in this multi-party forum, the negotiations, they deadlocked. In other words, they could not agree what type of government they must form. When the negotiations were deadlocked, a communist by the name of Joe Slovo, he suggested what was known as sunset clause. What do we mean by sunset clause? Joe Slovo says that we must establish a government of national unity for 5 years. Meaning, all political parties, they must be represented according to the number of votes they have received for 5 years. At the same time, because there was a fear amongst the members of the National Party, what will happen to their civil jobs? That is the public service. George Floyd said, the jobs of your public services, they are guaranteed for 5 years. No white person will lose his job in the public service for 5 years. But when there are new elections in 1999, the party that will win those elections will control everything. So the National Party agreed, and all parties agreed that now that's what we want. We want the government of national union. And then they agreed that South Africa will be undivided. There will be local government, provincial government, as well as national government. Furthermore, still there were violence that was continuing. The AWB invaded World Trade Center in 1993, while this multi-party negotiation forum was continuing. St. James Massacre during Sunday evening service on 25 July 1993. A group of APLA cadres, APLA is a military wing of the Pan-Africanist Congress. The APLA cadres, they attacked the St. James Church in Kenilworth using grenades and AK-47s. They killed 11 members of the congregation and wounded 58. There was also killing at the Heidelberg Tavern. This attack on Heidelberg Tavern, it took place in Observatory, Cape Town in 1993. However, after the Sunset Clause, everything was in order. So political parties have reached an agreement that on the 27th of April, there will be elections in 1994. In November 1993, an interim constitution for South Africa was agreed upon. In March 1994, there was a Shell House massacre. IFP have agreed that they will participate in the elections. Now in 1994, IFP members, they marched to the Shell House, which is the headquarters of the African National Congress. They were killed by the ANC security forces. The Freedom Front and the IFP joined the elections. The government of national unity, it oversees a new constitution. On the 27th of April 1994, South Africa became a first democratic country. In other words, there were first democratic elections. Nelson Mandela became the first black president. Thabo Mbeki became the first deputy president. F.W. de Klerk became the second deputy president. And Gatsha became the Minister of Home Affairs. So this clearly indicates that on the 27th of April 1994, a government of national unity was in place. So if you count those steps, more or less they will give you 9 or 10. Starting with CODESA Minute, coming to Pretoria Minute, going to CODESA I, progressing to a wise-only referendum, culminating at CODESA II, the record of understanding, the Multiparty negotiation forum, the violence, the agreement, and lastly, the cabinet. So, when I calculated, I come up with 10, you may come up with 11. Now, bear in mind that this is an essay question. We know that in essay, we look at 2 components. We look at content as well as presentation. In other words, in your essay, how is asked, but these 10 steps, dark or blue, they must appear in your essay. In other words, if you are given whatever question you are given, if you write these steps correctly, you are sure to get 29 marks out of 50, which is 58%, which is a pass. Now, the other 21 marks, it will come from your presentation. Have you taken a stance? Can we clearly see your introduction? Can we see all these 10 steps in your body? Can we see that you have sustained your line of argument, depending on the type of question you are given? Can we see your last paragraph, that it is really concluding what we have discussed in your essay? In other words, there must be a synergy in your essay. So, there is no way that in your conclusion you may add new information. It must be clear to everybody that you are just summarizing what you have already discussed in your essay. So, in other words, in this 50 marks in an essay, 29 marks is for the content. And then another 21 marks, it is for the presentation. So, as I already said earlier on, I said this essay, it is a very, very tricky essay, in the sense that there is no way that you can start with step number 10. It means you must start with step number 1 and then proceeding up to step number 10. In all these steps, what is important is that what have they agreed upon. And in those meetings, who were participating. For example, if you talk about the CODESA minutes, you must tell that who were meeting in this round of negotiations, then it's 6 members of the ANC versus 6 members of the National Party. What did they agree upon? The National Party agreed it will end Separate Amenities Act. They will open lines of communication. The National Party will release political prisoners as well as end repressive laws. Now, if you are in step number 2, who are meeting in this Pretoria Minute, then you must also indicate that it's still the 6 members of the ANC and the 6 members of the National Party. What do they agree upon? The ANC surprised everyone when it indicated that it will suspend the armed struggle. And on its side, the National Party, it agreed to release all political prisoners and ended the state of emergency in Natal. Now, if you proceed to CODESA I, who were in this meeting, then you must tell us it is not now only the National Party and the ANC. It's the ANC, the National Party, and the other 17 political parties. Was this CODESA I a success or a failure? It was a success because working committees were appointed and the political parties, they agreed and signed the record of intent or the declaration of intent. They agreed on the in-depth judiciary, on the multi-party democracy, as well as the new constitution. However, there are other parties that withdrew themselves from CODESA I, like the IFP, the Conservative Party, as well as the PAC. On the wise-only referendum, what was the voting outcome? Then you must indicate that the majority, they agree that de Klerk must continue with the negotiations. On CODESA II, you must indicate that it was a failure because political parties, they failed to reach an agreement on the constitution as well as on the interim government. After the failure of CODESA II, there was ongoing violence. So I said there are many incidents of that ongoing violence, whereby in Gauteng there was Inkatha supporters attacking ANC supporters in trains. There was Maibotong massacre, as well as there was Bishop massacre. Now, what did the role players, Mandela and de Klerk, when they see that there was an ongoing violence, they came together secretly, and that was known as a record of understanding. ANC represented by Ramaphosa, as well as the National Party represented by Ruth Meyer, they agreed that there must be a constitution, there must be fences that are erected in the hostels, because that's where violence emerged. So after the record of understanding, it led to all parties to meet again. So that's what was known as the Multiparty Negotiation Forum. So it was key because they agreed that a date must be set as the 27th of April 1994, and there will be a constitution. And then they failed to agree on the type of government. It's then that the South African Communist Party member by the name of George Lobo suggested the sunset clause, meaning that there must be a government of national unity for 5 years, as well as the jobs of the wise in the civil work or in the public sector, they are guaranteed for 5 years. After the multi-party negotiation forum, you must know that there was also incidents of violence. The agent will be, as well as the killing of Crisani in 1993. Is then that this incident, it is very significant because for the first time, de Klerk knew that he was losing the control of the country, and then he asked Nelson Mandela to address the nation in the national television. And then Mandela, he managed to calm down violence. And then on the 27th of April 1994, there were first democratic elections in South Africa. Nelson Mandela became the first democratic president of the Republic. Thabo Mbeki became the first deputy president, as well as de Klerk became the second deputy president. Gatsha Buthelezi was made to be the Minister of Home Affairs. So this clearly indicates that all those steps, they led to the formation of the first government of national unity in 1994. Grade 12, we will stop there for today. Meaning, what we've done the content. In other words, out of your 50 marks in this essay, we've done 29 marks. Then we'll continue some time and give an example of what this essay expects of you. For your homework, you can start in looking at previous question papers, how this particular question, which is question 5 in paper 2, is asked. So that when we come again, we will critique the essay that has been developed by previous learners. Then it means while you will be critiquing that essay on yourself, you will also critiquing the essay that you have prepared. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to me today.